A lot of us think about bots as sort of that random dude on Twitter with a lot of numbers in his name is not real, but you're talking about something much more sophisticated than that. Tell me what your theory of bots is, and then explain what it means in terms of how we understand what's real and what's not real at all on the internet.
Sure. Certainly knowing who's real is one of the most important integrity problems on the internet. What we've seen is bots are one of the most common threads in most security and fraud incidents across the board. Nearly 80% of all attacks in security or fraud incidents have a bot used somewhere in the attack. And so what you're seeing is that cyber criminal groups and actors have adopted bots, just like we have in business, for all the things that you can do in that arena. And so we've seen bots do everything from hack into accounts, could be the bank account, social media account, to interact with websites to increase the popularity or scrape sensitive data, or even hijack advertising revenue, to everything in between. Bots were signing up for vaccination slots during COVID. Bots were influencing votes, obviously, during the election and in some important policy votes going back several years.
Let's take a step back if we could.
Obviously, we see bots hijacking trending algorithms.
Let's take a step back if we could.
We've even seen, yeah.
Yeah, Tamer, I was just going to say, let's take a step back if we could and just define bot, because I think a lot of us think of bots just purely in terms of social media, but what you're talking about is something a lot more sophisticated and different. You know, you're talking about sort of artificial fake personas everywhere, right?
Right, yeah. I feel like I can write a science fiction novel on all the types of bots that we've seen in the last 10 years of fighting bot activity. In its simplest form, a bot is simply a set of instructions written in code to automate a device to do something, right? So you can automate your device to go check your bank account, take some action, to go check some information. And that could be done in 30 lines of code. We see bots today that are tens of thousands of lines of code. And if you think about Terminator 2, right? You remember the first version, it's a big hulk of metal. You can kind of tell it's a bot, it's obvious. But fast forward to the later generations and it starts to look more and more human. So one of the most important trends that we've seen in the last 10 years is that bots are increasingly more human-like, and to the point of being difficult to determine the difference.
And who's deploying these bots? Is this, Russian intelligence, as we focus on so much in terms of election security, or is this just fraudsters generally who are trying to scam any kind of system online?
Yeah, great questions. Remember, bots are one of the most prolific tools in most cybersecurity incidents and fraud incidents. And another critical trend that we've seen is that there is a bot economy, right? So it's no longer the case that you have to have the skills and expertise to write bot code, to infect machines, to launder money, to run an illegitimate business. There is a marketplace for that, and a marketplace of goods and services. One of the bots in recent times, one of the bots that we've taken down is a bot called Eve. It was 1.7 million infected machines, and ultimately led to the indictment of 8 Russian cyber criminals. 4 of them were extradited, and the ringleader received felony charges last year. In that model, the bot authors were different than the people running the fake business, were different than the malware developers. It was more of an economy, and that's one of the more important trends that we've seen here.
So tell me what the weirdest thing you've seen a bot out there doing. I mean, we talked about this last week, and you talked a little bit about, bots sitting there watching videos in order to run up the counts on videos for fraudulent purposes. I mean, what weird stuff are these bots out there doing?
Yeah, virtually anything can be explained by the incentives most of the time. So we've seen bots designed to buy concert tickets, right? I've never seen a bot show up at a concert, but we've actually seen bots designed to listen to music in some cases. I still haven't figured out whether classical is more popular with bots or hip hop, but that's one of the recent things we've seen.
They like techno, I think.
Most likely.
So when a bot is listening to music, who benefits from that, right? What's the purpose of that scam?
Yeah, look, there's incredible value to making something more popular on the internet. And this could be a song, it could be a website, it could be a story, right? And in some cases, it could be change or influence the minds of thousands or millions of people. The inherent value depends on who's on the other side, but popularity is something that is coveted. When you think about the internet, it's fundamentally about slices of human attention. The entire internet is built on human interaction and engagement. And if you can do something with a bot, you can magnify that, multiply that to a large extent.
And we've got a couple of questions coming in now from the audience. I want to get to those, but before I do, I really want to ask you sort of to pin this down for me in terms of this idea of the workplace of the future that we're all talking about and the more virtual world that we're all in. If you're in business of any kind, measuring popularity of things on the internet is hugely important to you. But as you're saying, these bots are out there fraudulently amplifying certain things. How can people tell what's actually popular on the internet with all of this fake activity? And do you have a percentage for us in terms of what you think the bots are doing in terms of overall fraudulent viewing on the internet?
Sure. It ranges widely depending on the area, but one of the most important impacts that you're highlighting is data contamination, and it's not just popularity of things on the internet. It's our marketing information. It's how we do our advertising, how we measure engagement on the products that we're building. If you think what happens with a 10 to 20% skew, what does that do to the decisions that we're making? But all of this comes back to how do you defend against this, right? And broadly, how do you defend against these attacks in security? And I think, as security leaders, one of the most important things we have to remember about cybersecurity is that it's an economic problem. It's about the cost of the attack and the cost of defense. And if you can understand that, you can have an informed discussion on just about any security topic.
And speaking of security and defense, that leads me to our first question from a viewer here. Hugo asks, what is the future of CAPTCHAs? And that's a good question, I think, because you look at these bots and they must be able to get to the point now where they can figure out what's a stop sign and what's not a stop sign, how many bicycles are in the image, all those things that defenders put up in order to make sure that real human beings are watching this content, right?
That's right. CAPTCHAs as a standalone has been categorically defeated for years with machine learning algorithms and bots. So
why are we still filling them out all the time?
It's a good question. I think it's partly education and knowledge and of the problem. There's academic papers going back several years about how to defeat a CAPTCHA. And we've seen even CAPTCHA solving farms where a bot will call out to a farm overseas somewhere and a CAPTCHA will be solved in 10 seconds and continue. That's not the solution. And it's also the completely wrong approach. We shouldn't be testing our humans. We shouldn't be treating our humans like they're the fraudsters, right? We should be testing the bots in different ways. And so increasing friction on humans is not the way to go. Identifying risk of a bot and then escalating authentication or friction on a very small subset is the best approach in that regard.
So we've been talking a lot about defense here, but how about offense? What are you doing to go after and sort of root out these bot networks, identify them and find them? Is that just an international law enforcement problem, or is there some other way technically that you can solve the issue?
When I was in the Air Force, one of the most important lessons I learned about combat was well before I was in Iraq or Afghanistan and well before I was in the cockpit. And the lesson that we learned was that if you're ever going into a battle to fight a fair fight, turn around. That's not the way you win a battle. You have to tip the advantage to your side. And that principle applies very much in cybersecurity. One of the most effective ways we can create an unfair advantage is collective protection. This idea of collaboration between companies, sharing intelligence and threat and knowledge, working with public and private sector are all critical to actually creating an economic advantage for defending against cyber attacks.